Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I want to show you how to make a corner to corner wattle stitch rectangle. I already have a corner to corner wattle stitch square video, so if you want to work a square project then I'll pop the link up here and you can go and take a look. But I had a couple of people ask me previously if I could show you how to work a rectangle, so here we are. If you are already familiar with a corner to corner wattle stitch, you might want to skip to chapter 2 because this first part is the same as when you work a square. But if you are here for the first time, then grab your hook, grab your yarn, and I'll show you how to work this rather funky little rectangle. Once again, if you are familiar with how to make a corner to corner wattle stitch square, you probably want to skip ahead to the next chapter because that covers what happens once we've done our increases. For those of you that are new to the wattle stitch corner to corner, you want to start with a chain 4. So slip knot, chain 4, and into the 4th chain from your hook, so the first chain that you worked, you want to work our wattle cluster. A wattle cluster consists of a single crochet, chain 1 and double crochet, all into that same chain from your foundation chain. Then you want to chain 3 and turn your work. From now on, unless we are at the end of a row, we are going to be working into the chain 1 gaps in the middle of your wattle cluster. So we want to work into the chain 1 gap, from the row below, another wattle cluster of single crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And then at the end of each row, we want to work into the 3rd chain of the turning chain, another wattle stitch cluster. The reason I like to work into the actual chain and not into the space created by it is because my work tends to flare if I am working into the chain spaces. Don't ask me why, it just does. So to make sure that it doesn't flare, I like to work into the turning chain itself rather than the gap that it makes. And you want to pop your single crochet, chain 1, double crochet all into that same chain from the row below. Chain 3, turn your work again, and we're repeating that process, but each time we will have one more wattle stitch cluster to work into, and that's how your project grows. So again, our wattle stitch cluster is a single crochet, chain 1, double crochet. And you want to work all the way along, so you will miss this single crochet, miss this double crochet, and into this chain 1 gap we'll work another one of those clusters. Then into the top of the 3rd chain from the chain 3 turn on the row below, we want to work that one final cluster. So single crochet, chain 1, double crochet, all into that chain, the 3rd chain from the row below. And it's essentially that one row over and over, getting bigger each time. I'll show you a couple more times. So we're going to chain 3 and turn our work a wattle cluster into that chain 1 gap from the row below, find the next chain 1 gap and do the same, find the next chain 1 gap and rinse and repeat the same. And then when we get to the end of the row, we are going to find the 3rd chain of our turning chain from the row below, pop our hook into it and work that one final wattle stitch cluster. It's this final cluster that makes your project grow. So one last time, chain 3, turn your work, wattle cluster into each of the chain 1 gaps from the row below. And one final wattle cluster into the top of the 3rd chain of your chain 3 turn. And you want to repeat that row over and over until your project is as wide as you want the short edge of your rectangle to be. So go away, make it as wide as you want the short edge of the rectangle to be, and I will show you what we do next. So I've now reached a point with my project where I am happy with the width of the short edge of my rectangle. So I'm now going to switch from working increase rows to working rectangle rows, which are the rows that you work when you don't want to make a square and you want to carry on increasing the length of this edge but making sure that this edge here doesn't get any wider. So normally at this point we would chain 3 if we were still increasing, but because we want this row, this edge to start straightening off, we are going to chain 2 and turn your work. If you're new to this, I would suggest that you mark the end that you are going to be working your decreases on, just so that you don't get confused. But once you've done a few of these, you won't need to mark it anymore. The next row is worked the same as an increase row. So aside from that chain 2, we want to go all the way along the row and work our wattle stitch clusters, just as we've been doing on all of those increase sections. And because we want to carry on increasing on this edge, we work our wattle cluster into that top of the chain 3 exactly as we have been doing on our increase rows. And again, as we are increasing the length of this end, we want to chain 3 and turn. And work our way down with those wattle clusters until we get to the last cluster of the row. So now we have our last chain gap from the last cluster, and we have our chain 2 that we worked on the turn. And for these edges, you want to work a single crochet 2 together, or a single crochet decrease as it's also known. So you want to pull up a loop from inside the chain 1 gap, don't finish it off, pop your hook into that second chain from the chain 2 turn, pull up another loop and yarn over and pull through all 3 loops. Try not to make this stitch too tight, because if you make it too tight it can pull the edge in as you work up. Then we want to chain 2, keep those chains nice and loose, turn our work and work all the way back along with our wattle clusters. Once again, this end without the stitch marker is where we increase, so we want to work a wattle cluster into that top of the chain 3 from the chain 3 turn from below. Chain 3, because we are on an increase side, turn your work and then work back along, working those wattle clusters all the way until that last wattle cluster. Then when you get to the final wattle cluster from the row below, which is here, you want to work your single crochet decrease or your single crochet 2 together again. So you want to pop your hook in and pull up a loop, and then you want to find the second chain, and it can sometimes look a little bit hidden, but you'll have your first chain here and your second chain is the one here, and that's what you want to put your hook into. If you're finding you're struggling to find it, you can mark it with a stitch marker, but often once you've done a few rows you will just learn to recognize it, and it's just a little bit further down than you would expect it to be. So you pull up your second loop, yarn over and pull through all 3, remembering not to have those stitches too tight. Chain 2 loosely and work all the way up with your wattle clusters, and it's these 2 rows that you repeat until your work is as long on the longer edge as you want your long edge of your rectangle to be. That can be a slightly squarer rectangle if you're only wanting to make it slightly rectangle. It could be a super long rectangle if you're making a scarf, but the principle is the same no matter how big or long or skinny you're going. You just want to keep working these 2 rows with a decrease at this end where your stitch marker is to get that nice straight edge, and an increase at your increase end where you're making your long edge of your rectangle longer. When the long edge of your rectangle is the size that you want it to be, we are now going to decrease at both ends of our work. So we're not just going to work the decrease on this edge, we're going to work the decrease on this edge too. And to start that decrease off, you want to have your work at a point where your hook has just finished, so you are on a long edge row. And just like we did with the short edge when we were ready to start decreasing, we want to chain 2 instead of 3, and we want to turn our work and work our wattle clusters along that row in the same way as normal until we get to the end of the row. Once again, when we reach that last cluster from the row below, we want to pop our hook in and work our single crochet 2 together. So we pull up our first loop from the chain 1 gap, and then we want to find the second chain of our chain 2 turn, pop our hook into it, draw up a second loop, yarn over and pull through all 3. Then we want to chain 2 and work back up along that row until we get to the last wattle cluster of the previous row. And just like we did when we first started our decrease at the other end, we are now at this end, the longer edge, also we need to work our single crochet decrease, and we want to work that over the last chain 1 gap of the wattle cluster from the row below, and the second chain of our chain 2 turn. So we've pulled up a loop through our chain 1 gap from the wattle cluster. We're going to pull up a loop from the chain 2, and then we're going to pull through all 3, remembering not to pull it too tight because you don't want your edges to pull in. Then, because we are decreasing at both ends, we're going to chain 2, and we're going to work all the way back along, repeating this process until we have 2 wattle clusters left. So repeat that process all the way down on your decrease until we have 2 wattle clusters left. I have decrease down, so I just have 2 wattle stitch clusters left. So the first cluster, we want to just work normally another wattle cluster into it, and then we want to work our single crochet 2 together over the second chain 1 space, and then into the chain 2 from the turning chain. There you go, that's your single crochet 2 together. Then the way I finish these rectangles off, because I think it gives the squarest corner, is I chain 2, turn my work, and I work a single crochet 2 together over that last wattle stitch cluster and the chain 2 from your turning chain from the row below. Some people just work a single crochet, but I find that working a single crochet 2 together gives a nice square corner. And you want to break your yarn, leave a longer tail if it's your work for sewing your ends in, pull it through, and there we have a corner to corner wattle stitch rectangle. You can make these as big or as small as you want. You just need to repeat those rows until it's the same size. Make sure when you're working your decreases that you don't have them too tight, because otherwise it can pull in slightly. But that is essentially that. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Please let me know in the comments if you have, and I'll see you again for another tutorial soon. Bye!